At 10 o'clock local time, a Ukrainian MiG-29 Fulcrum crossed the front line near Kherson, flying just 50 feet above the ground. Its target was a former grain silo that Russian forces had converted into a drone command and control center. For the first few minutes, the mission went smoothly until everything changed within seconds. Unknown to the MiG-29 pilot, a Russian Igla man-portable air defense team stationed at a checkpoint 2 kilometers ahead had locked onto his heat signature and fired. A white, hot smoke trail spiraled skyward. The 9K-338 Igla missile, moving at Mach 2, began turning toward the jet. Its infrared seeker locked firmly onto the MiG's twin RD-33 engines. The pilot pulled hard left, then immediately reversed right, forcing the missile into an overshoot. But that was only the first. Within 4 seconds, 3 more Iglas launched from different directions. Russian troops fired blindly without tone confirmation, relying on proximity detonation. The MiG's SPO-15 Berioza radar warning receiver stayed silent. It could only detect radar-guided threats, not heat-seeking missiles. Like a smoke detector that senses smoke but not fire, it gave no warning. The only signs were the plumes of missile smoke climbing around him. He pulled a 9G defensive brake turn, crushing himself into the seat. The Iglas could not match the turn rate. All 3 overshot harmlessly, but the launch plumes had exposed his position. Within 20 miles, every Russian observer from Kherson to northern Crimea now knew where to look. He dropped back to 50 feet, threading between power lines at 540 knots, roughly 1,000 kilometers per hour. The radar altimeter screamed continuous warnings. Though the instrument showed a steady 15 meters, real clearance fluctuated between 6 and 25 meters because of uneven terrain. One lapse in focus would turn the $20 million jet into an expensive lawn dart. This was nap of the Earth flight at its most extreme, using terrain contours to mask from radar every 8 to 10 seconds. Powerline corridors offered the safest path, few obstacles, but dangerously low altitude. Rooftop teams with shoulder-fired missiles could literally look down on him. More Iglas streaked up ahead. Some Russian teams fired over the shoulder, launching behind his path so he would fly into the missile's seeker cone. Each hard maneuver burned 90 to 100 kilograms of fuel from his 3,200 kilogram internal capacity. Simple math, 30 such turns, and he would be forced to eject. At this altitude, satellite navigation was unreliable. Only visual waypoints and his own eyes kept him alive. Meanwhile, a P-18 Spoon Res-D very high-frequency radar began catching intermittent returns, operating between 150 and 170 megahertz. Its long wavelength penetrated terrain masking like hearing the bass of a song through walls. The radar operator noticed the repeated blips and alerted a Panzer S-1 crew 12 kilometers ahead, aligning their fire zone along the MiG's projected course. The newer Igla S variants could detect both near-infrared, around 0.9 micrometers, and mid-infrared, between 3 and 5 micrometers, making flares less effective. The MiG's ultraviolet 26 countermeasure dispensers carried only 60 cartridges. He had already used 10. The odds worsened by the second. Another checkpoint tried to engage, but firing at a jet moving over 1,000 kilometers per hour from a stationary launch is like trying to hit a bullet with a stone. One missile went ballistic, spiraling into a field. The MiG-29 banked hard around a radio mast. The pilot checked his 6 clear, for now, but new smoke trails rose behind him. Russian spotters were already relaying his heading to Buk M2 and Tor M2 batteries farther south. The entire occupied sector was coming alive like an anthill he had just kicked open. His SPO-15 Berioza threat receiver started chirping as search radars came online and began painting him, trying to establish a track. In minutes, every surface-to-air missile system within 50 miles would likely know his approximate location. First, though, he had to survive the next 30 seconds because a man-portable air defense team had appeared on a factory roof and a missile was already leading his flight path, leaving him almost no room to maneuver between the power lines. The factory roof Igla forced him up to 200 feet, a dangerous exposure but preferable to being struck by a missile. The SPO-15 threat display immediately filled with contacts, as multiple radar systems painted him across different frequency bands, each spike representing a different threat. The Panzer fire control radar in search mode was sweeping like an umbrella out to a few dozen kilometers before switching to track mode inside a shorter corridor to prepare a shot. Search mode behaved like a lighthouse, while track mode was like a locked spotlight. The instant the fire control switched to track, he would have only seconds before a missile could be launched. The pilot executed a notch filter-style maneuver by turning roughly perpendicular to the radar beam. Moving sideways relative to a Doppler radar reduces your velocity signature and can mask you in ground clutter, so you can effectively drop out of the beam. That tactic, however, deviated from the planned egress, added miles and burned fuel he could not spare. Every defensive move was a trade-off between surviving the immediate threat and having enough fuel to get home. As he dipped, ducked, dived, and dodged, the Russians assembled a layered surface-to-air missile trap. The old P-18 spoon rest VHF radar, whose 150 to 170 MHz wavelengths penetrate terrain masking, was already flushing out his general corridor. Once very high-frequency detection vectored the engagement chain, X-band fire control radars would lock on and hand him to point defense systems. Meanwhile, a Tor M2 battery was warming up from cold start. Modern Tor variants can scan many contacts and engage multiple targets in quick succession and would be fully combat ready inside a minute or two. If that were not enough, a Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system began jamming GPS L1 and L2 bands, approximately 1,575.42 MHz and 1,227.60 MHz, degrading satellite navigation reception across the area. His GPS receiver flickered as 8 satellites dropped to 5, then to 4. With reduced satellite fixes, typical GPS-aided weapons lose most of their optimal accuracy. Ukrainian engineers had prepared for this. The modified JDAM ER on his pylon relied on a high-quality ring laser gyro inertial navigation system, the same class of inertial unit used in production JDAM kits, so that even with GPS degraded, the weapon could hold a much tighter error budget for the short glide than a pure GPS-only solution. The inertial unit could maintain useful accuracy for the brief 60 to 150 second glide window by integrating high-rate inertial data. He toggled the stores management BIT and data streamed through the modified pylon interface, a pragmatic jury-rigged bridge between Western guidance kits and Soviet-era pylons. The GPS almanac and current satellite geometry uploaded, the inertial gyro spun up and battery status showed ample time for the planned glide. He set a backup impact profile using barometric and inertial navigation only in case GPS died completely. 30 seconds from the initial point, he was committed with no abort and no safe alternate. Tor would be fully online in approximately 45 seconds, and he would be climbing into its engagement envelope long before it cooled down. He checked countermeasures again and had 48 flares remaining before painting his nose at the sky. When he pulled both RD-33 engines lit and the MiG vaulted nose up in a high G-yo-yo climb, converting forward speed into altitude, the SPO-15 searching beep hardened into the solid continuous tone every pilot dreads as a fire control track was achieved. Through the heads-up display, his airspeed bled off as altitude rose, and he needed to get to 15,000 feet before decelerating to about 180 knots, the approximate stall speed with external stores. The next minute would decide everything. The math was brutal. He had exactly 4 seconds in the release window at this climb rate. Too early, and the JDAM extended range would not have enough energy for its 40-kilometer glide. Too late, and he would stall with a missile inbound. The Tor M2 launched. The pilot did not see it, but the SPO-15 Berioza screamed the news. A 9M331 missile airborne, accelerating to 850 meters per second, with its 15-kilometer range and 10-kilometer altitude ceiling. Intercept in 11 seconds. JDAM release in 6. He kept the control stick buried in his lap, fighting every instinct to maneuver. The weapon needed stable flight for clean separation, or it might tumble instead of gliding, passing through 12,000 feet, airspeed down to 250 knots. The missile was boring in, its command guidance link with the ground radar updating its intercept solution 10 times per second. The Russian operator was good, keeping the lock despite the MiG-29's near vertical attitude 13,000 feet, 220 knots. Now the stall warning system started chirping, getting close to the edge of controlled flight 14,000 feet, 200 knots, almost there. At exactly 15,000 feet and 185 knots, the pilot released the JDAM extended range. The release button sent 28 volts through the store's management system to the pylon. Explosive bolts fired with a distinctive thump he could feel through the airframe. The 500-pound bomb fell away, initially tumbling. Then its GPS receiver acquired satellites and the flight control computer took over. Gas generators deployed the diamond-shaped wings with a puff of white smoke. The weapon immediately began its 40-kilometer glide toward the grain elevator, where Russian drone operators were conducting their morning strikes near Kherson. But the pilot could not celebrate yet. He needed 2 more seconds of predictable flight for clean separation. 2 seconds of that felt like hours, with a missile closing at twice the speed of sound. 1,000, 1,000 separation confirmed. Now he could fight. Rolling inverted, he pulled through into a split S defense, diving hard back toward Earth. 6 B-series chaff cartridges fired from the dispensers, blooming into a 100-meter-wide cloud of radar-reflective aluminum strips. The 9M331 missile used command guidance until its terminal phase. The ground radar had to maintain lock to steer it. The pilot's sudden dive created a Doppler notch his radial velocity, relative to the radar approached 0, making him vanish from their screen like a ghost. The Russian operator switched to his optical backup channel, trying to manually guide the missile through the chaff using a television camera, but it was like playing the world's deadliest video game with massive lag, while someone threw tinfoil at your screen. The pilot timed his dive perfectly, putting the missile above him just as its proximity fuse armed at 500 meters. The weapon detonated about 300 meters away, close enough that the warhead sent tungsten fragments everywhere. One fragment punched through the left engine compressor section with a sound like a hammer hitting a bell. Exhaust gas temperature immediately spiked into the red. The pilot throttled back to idle, then shut down the damaged engine completely. The fire warning light stayed off good news, but he had just lost half his thrust 40 miles behind enemy lines. The MiG-29 was designed by engineers who assumed everything would break eventually. Single-engine flight was entirely possible, just not ideal when everyone and their mother was trying to shoot you down. The MiG screamed over Holopristan at 800 feet, and the entire city erupted. Every Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft position opened up simultaneously, twin 23mm autocannons pumping out 950 rounds per minute each. The Russians were using barrage fire technique, not aiming at where the plane was, but creating walls of steel where they calculated it would be. It was like shooting skeet, except the clay pigeon was doing 500 knots and actively trying not to die. Every 5th round was a tracer. They looked like Star Wars laser bolts. But in real life, they meant a projectile bigger than your thumb screaming toward you at twice the speed of sound. The Russians had set up an ambush flak trap, holding fire until he was committed to his exit route, with no room to maneuver smart tactical thinking. But the pilot had one advantage. He was flying through his own sonic boom envelope. The overpressure wave disrupted optical sights, making everything shimmer like a desert mirage. Gunners were trying to aim through constantly distorting air. Their shots went wide. Then he started jinking random 2 to 3 G-turns every 2 seconds to defeat tracking solutions. On 2 engines, this would be routine. On one engine with degrading hydraulics, it was like trying to perform surgery while riding a mechanical bull. The yellow hydraulic warning light had been on since the shrapnel hit. Now it turned red. Primary hydraulic system failure. The backup system engaged automatically, but provided only 30% control authority. Every control input now required massive stick and rudder movement. Each motion felt 10 times harder than before. 23mm rounds began connecting, and the distinctive sound of metal punching through aluminum skin filled the cockpit. The pilot compensated with rudder and differential thrust, except he only had one engine. Every system failure cascaded into another problem. The aircraft was becoming harder to control with every hit. Through the chaos, he could see Ukrainian territory ahead, maybe 35 miles away. The MiG-29 was barely responding to controls, but it was still flying because Soviet engineers built these machines like flying tanks. Triple redundancy in critical systems gave the pilot the ability to fly with half the aircraft shot away. Behind him, about 40 miles back, the JDAM extended range was in its terminal dive at roughly 287 meters per second. The drone operators in the grain elevator had just 3 more seconds to get out. The weapon's FMU-152 joint programmable fuse was set to delay mode so it would penetrate before detonating. The bomb struck the center support column at over 600 miles per hour, about 268 meters per second. It punched through the column and then through 2 more floors of concrete and steel before detonating. Approximately 445 pounds of tritonal, about 80% TNT and 20% aluminum powder, converted its chemical energy in microseconds. The blast produced a massive fireball, an extreme overpressure near the detonation point. Secondary effects and incendiary energy from the aluminum greatly increased thermal output. Secondary explosions rippled through stored munitions and batteries, adding to the destruction. The support column failed. Thousands of tons of concrete and stored grain began a progressive collapse, each floor pancaking onto the one below until the building folded in on itself. The dust cloud rose hundreds of feet, visible from Ukrainian positions across the river. The Ukrainian pilot coaxed his crippled MiG toward friendly airspace, holding minimum controllable airspeed on one engine and fighting failing hydraulics every meter. Behind him, the Russian drone headquarters was gone. The hunters had finally become the hunted. Thank you. Bye for now.